welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something, well, maybe a bit unexpected. Can rodents actually show empathy? We often think of empathy, understanding, sharing feelings as like a very human thing,
Mm-hmm.
but we've got some really fascinating science suggesting maybe those roots go deeper.
That's absolutely right. We're going to dig into this review article called Behavioral and Mechanistic Insight into Rodent Empathy.
Oh.
And our mission really is to look at the evidence. Do rats and mice show these empathy-like behaviors? What's happening in or underneath? What are the mechanisms and what does that tell us about empathy itself? Fundamentally, it's kind of a shortcut maybe to seeing the basic building blocks of social life.
Okay, so empathy in rodents.
Yeah.
When we say empathy here, what exactly are we talking about? Is it really possible a rat feels something like what we feel?
Well, broadly, yeah, empathy is about understanding and sharing emotional states. The whole debate in science has kind of shifted. It's less, do animals have it, and more,
How does it look?
exactly how do they show it, what's going on biologically. It's probably not, the super complex emotional world we live in, but there are definitely these basic pieces, foundational elements that seem to be there across species.
Foundational elements. Like what? Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about levels. Like really basic stuff is emotional contagion. One animal's feeling kind of spreading to another, or mimicry, copying actions.
Okay.
Then you get more complex things like actually taking another's perspective. With rodents, what we mostly see is evidence for those lower tier things,
Mhm.
emotional contagion, and also prosociality, helping behavior, essentially.
So, like, if one mouse seems stressed out, the one next to it gets stressed too. Is that really empathy though, or just I don't know a reaction like uh-oh danger nearby?
That's a great question. And honestly, that's where a lot of the scientific discussion is. Some skeptics say, yeah, maybe it's just reflex, instinct, not real empathy. But the other side, which is gaining traction, argues that these simple forms are the building blocks. They're where complex empathy starts. And here's something cool. Brain studies show when we see someone we care about in pain, our own pain areas, the emotional ones, light up.
Wow.
So it suggests this deep link between just seeing it and kind of feeling it ourselves. Even basic mimicry might be tied into our own empathy.
That's fascinating. Makes you wonder if those simple mirroring things are more important than they seem.
Mm-hmm.
But what about like understanding what the other animal's feeling? Putting yourself in their paws, so to speak.
Yeah. That gets into theory of mind, understanding that someone else has their own thoughts, feelings, perspective, different from yours. Like knowing your friend might want chocolate ice cream, even if you want vanilla.
Right.
That's super hard to test in animals, especially rodents. And honestly, apart from some hints in primates, there isn't much solid evidence they have that kind of higher level perspective taking empathy.
Okay, so are we just saying they pick up cues and react?
Yeah.
No deeper grasp of the other animal's situation.
Not necessarily just that. Proving perspective taking is tough, yeah. But some research hints rats might be smarter than we think.
They show signs of metacognition.
Thinking about thinking. In rats.
Sort of, yeah. Like in May's studies,
Yeah.
they judge if getting more info was worth it based on past experience.
Right.
If a maze was simple, quick reward, they just went for it.
Yeah.
Complex maze, they'd work harder to get info first, even without an immediate payoff.
Uh-huh.
Like they were assessing the value of knowing more. It's still being debated, but it suggests a level of thinking that could maybe underpin something more complex than just reacting.
Okay, the picture's definitely getting more complicated. So let's go back a bit. What were some of those really early studies that first got scientists thinking, maybe rodents do feel something for each other?
Yeah, there was some really pivotal stuff back in the mid-1900s. Church, 1959, that was a big one.
Okay.
Rats learned to press a lever for food. Simple enough. But the twist was pressing the lever shocked another rat nearby.
Yeah. And the key finding, rats that had been shocked themselves before, they pressed the lever way less when they saw another rat getting shocked. The ones who hadn't experienced shocks, they just kept pressing.
So the ones who knew what it felt like, they held back.
That was the interpretation, an empathetic response, recognizing that shared bad experience.
Wow. That is powerful. Seems like recognizing suffering.
Exactly. Then, a few years later, 1962, Rice and Gaynor, they looked at what seemed like helping.
Helping.
Yeah, they had a rat suspended, squealing, distressed, and other rats could press a lever to lower it.
Did they?
They did consistently press the lever for the squealing rat. But, and this is key, they wouldn't press it just to lower like a block of styrofoam.
Ah, so it was specific to the distressed rat.
Right. Interpreted as pro-social behavior. Doing something to help another, which we often link to empathy.
Okay, but I can already hear the counter-arguments bubbling up. Were there other explanations?
Like, absolutely. And that's science, right? Lavery and Foley in 63, they looked at that Rice and Gaynor study and said, hold on. Okay.
Maybe the squealing itself was just annoying, aversive to the rat hearing it. So pressing the lever wasn't about helping the other rat. It was just self-serving. Stop the unpleasant noise.
Makes sense, like turning off an alarm clock because it's loud.
Kind of, yeah. It just highlights how tricky it is to figure out the why behind animal behavior.
Yeah.
What's the real motivation?
Totally. So, given those early debates, how did the research move forward? What are scientists doing now to study this?
Well, a lot of modern work uses really carefully designed behavioral tests. They focus on measuring those foundational things we talked about. Emotional contagion and prosocial behavior.
Oh, building blocks.
Exactly. The idea is if we can observe these basic responses reliably in the lab, we can start to pick apart the brain mechanisms, the biology behind it all.
Okay.
So two main paths, generally. One is testing emotional contagion, expose one rodent to fear or pain, see how it affects an observer. The other is measuring prosocial stuff, set up a situation where one seems distressed, see if another tries to help. All right, let's dig into emotional contagion first.
Yeah.
How do they actually measure that? The fear spreading, the pain spreading.
Right. And just to quickly recap the difference, cognitive empathy is perspective taking. Emotional empathy is more like sharing the feeling contagion. We're mostly talking emotional empathy with rodents because it's easier to measure.
Got it.
So social transfer of fear, classic example. Observer mice saw another mouse dealing with biting flies. The observers got distressed too, even though the flies near them couldn't bite.
So they weren't in danger themselves.
Nope. Suggests they picked up distress cues, maybe how the other mouse acted, maybe even smell, social odors. So just seeing fear can trigger that survival response. Shows how social threat detection is, deeply wired.
Wow. So it wasn't about potential danger to themselves, but seeing the other mouse freaking out.
Precisely. And later studies found this fear contagion was stronger between relatives, siblings, familiar cage mates. Social bonds matter. Other experiments. Mice who'd never had a foot shock learned to freeze. That's a classic fear response, just by watching other mice get shocked repeatedly.
Learning fear by watching.
Yeah. And again, it was stronger if they were watching like a mating partner or a sibling versus a total stranger.
Familiarity and kinship again.
Yeah.
So what's happening in the brain when this social fear learning occurs?
Researchers have pinned down areas like the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC. It's involved in emotion, decision-making, also parts of the thalamus linked to the medial pain system.
Okay.
And what's really neat is if you temporarily block activity in those areas, it messes up the social fear learning. But if you block areas involved in just the sensation of pain, it doesn't have the same effect.
Ah, so it's the emotional part of the distress being transmitted, not just the raw sensory info.
Exactly. It's the affective component. Other work points to pathways connecting the prefrontal cortex, higher level processing, and the amygdala, the emotion hub. It's like seeing danger for someone else flips your own internal alarm switch beyond just noticing the shock or the flies.
Man, it's amazing how you see these basic reactions behaviorally, then find these complex brain links that echo our own experience. Really reframes what's fundamental about empathy.
Totally. And it's not always about watching it happen live. Some studies showed even just a quick interaction with a scared rat can make its cage mate more likely to freeze later, even if they didn't see the scary event itself.
So fear signals can linger, communicate subtly.
Seems like it. Maybe smell, maybe subtle behavior changes. And, interesting side note, while freezing is common in males, Some newer work suggests female rodents might use more active avoidance when they sense fear in others.
Okay, so that's fear spreading socially. What about pain itself? Can that feeling be transmitted too?
Yeah, this line of research looks directly at how seeing another in pain affects the observer's own pain responses.
How?
Well, say you test a mouse's pain sensitivity. If you do it while its cage mate is right there, also experiencing some pain, the first mouse often shows more pain behavior compared to being tested alone or with a stranger in pain.
So being near a suffering friend makes it worse.
Often, yeah. But here's a subtle twist. If the pain the observer sees looks less bad than maybe they'd expect, their own pain behaviors can actually decrease.
Huh. Like a social comparison effect.
Kind of suggests that, yeah.
Yeah.
A level of social adjustment in how pain is felt, it's not just a simple amplification.
That's really nuanced, so it's not uniform.
Right. And the relationship is critical. One study linked differences between familiar and unfamiliar male mice to testosterone and maybe a kind of social stress-induced pain relief. The social context, the relationship, it shapes the pain experience.
And stress itself seems like a big factor in all this emotional sharing, right?
Huge factor. Stress can be contagious too, and sometimes being stressed can actually block the contagion of pain.
Wait, block it. How does that work?
It's complex, but other studies found if you block the body's main stress response, the glucocorticoids, you can actually enable pain empathy even between strangers. So the observer's own stress level can either help or hinder their ability to connect with another's pain. And another weird thing, repeatedly seeing another rat in pain can lead observers to freeze initially, but then start yawning.
Yawning. Like sleepy yawning.
Maybe not. The hypothesis is it's a sign of rising distress, maybe a coping mechanism. If you block the stress system, the HPA axis, the yawning decreases.
Yawning is distress.
Ah,
That's counterintuitive.
tells you emotional expression isn't always what we assume, right?
Yeah.
And speaking of coping, in prairie voles, the pair bonding rodents, they've seen them groom distressed cage mates, like consolation. And
Yeah.
that seems to involve the ACC again and oxytocin receptors, a biological basis for comfort.
So witnessing pain can increase sensitivity sometimes. Is there also evidence for the flip side? Social interaction, reducing pain or stress?
Yeah.
Social buffering?
Yeah, in humans, social support definitely buffers pain. We know that well. In mice, the evidence for buffering pain itself is a bit
Hmm.
mixed, less consistent. But there's better evidence for buffering fear and stress in rats. Having a familiar buddy nearby can reduce freezing in scary situations.
How?
It seems linked to lower activity in the amygdala, the fear center. And just having a companion rat around can lower stress hormone levels when they're exploring a new, potentially stressful place. So even for a rat, a friendly face helps calm the nerves.
Really drives home how much social context matters.
Yeah.
Okay, what about how seeing pain changes our own basic pain sensitivity, our pain threshold?
Yeah, some really cool work showed even a short interaction with a rat in pain can make its familiar buddies more sensitive to pain later. Hypersensitivity.
Just from seeing it briefly.
Seems so. And this observed pain actually increases nerve activity way down in the spinal cord, in the dorsal horn where pain signals are processed.
Ooh.
But here's the kicker. If you damage a specific part of the observer rat's brain, the medial prefrontal cortex, a higher level area that social enhancement of pain goes away. Damage to the amygdala or other areas doesn't do it.
So it's not just a reflex down in the spine. The higher brain is involved in amplifying it based on social cues.
Exactly. Suggests a top-down cognitive process influencing how you're affected by others' pain.
Fascinating.
And circling back to yawning for a sec, it's often seen as contagious in social animals, right? Humans, apes, dogs. And the odds of catching a yawn often depend on how close you are socially to the yawner. And remember, in rats, it can also signal distress. And guess what chemical pops up again? Oxytocin. It can trigger yawning in male rats. Hints at a link between this simple social signal, distress, and the neurochemistry of bonding.
Oxytocin again. It really seems central to all this social emotional stuff. What's its specific role with pain and social behavior in rodents?
It's definitely a key player. We know in humans it affects pain perception via social interaction. In rodents, some really striking effects, like inject one rat with oxytocin,
Yeah.
and its cage mate might become more tolerant to pain, like heat, even though the cage mate got no oxytocin itself.
Through smell?
Seems like it, yeah. Olfactory cues, like a chemical signal. And similarly, the smell of a stressed rat can actually relieve pain in another naive rat.
Stress smell causes pain relief.
Weird, right? But if you block oxytocin's action with an antagonist drug, that pain relief effect is gone, and oxytocin receptors are right there in the spinal cord, involved in stress-induced pain relief. So yeah, you can think of it as a crucial social signaling molecule for pain and interaction.
Wow. Like a chemical language of empathy almost.
Yeah.
Communicated through smells and internal systems.
You could kind of frame it that way. But it's complex. Its effects depend on familiarity, the specific situation, even the sex of the animals. And findings in rodents don't always perfectly match human studies, so we need to be careful comparing. But fundamentally, oxytocin seems vital for how animals within a species communicate, survive, and adapt socially.
This is all incredibly compelling evidence for these shared feelings. But let's switch gears slightly to the more active stuff, the helping behaviors. Prosociality. What have we learned about rodents actually helping each other?
Right, prosocial behavior, defined generally as actions that help someone else, maybe even at a small cost to yourself, without an immediate, obvious payoff.
Okay.
And there's this really amazing experimental setup from Benami Berthal and colleagues. They put one rat in a small, clear restrainer, kind of trapped, and another rat, usually a cage mate, is outside and can learn to open a little door to free the trapped one.
Do they?
They do. They learn it. They get faster over time. And crucially, they only really work to open it if there's a distressed cage mate inside. Not if it's empty, not if it has a toy rat.
So it's specifically targeted helping.
Exactly. And female rats, interestingly, were more likely to help in these studies. And it didn't seem to be just about wanting social contact afterwards, because if given chocolate, the helper would often free the trapped rat and then share the chocolate.
Share chocolate. Wow.
Yeah.
That really argues against simple selfishness.
It strongly suggests a motivation driven by the other's distress. And follow-up work showed social experience matters hugely. They'd help cage mates and even strangers of the same strain. But usually not strangers from a different strain, unless they lived together previously. So it's about the established social relationship, familiarity, not just pure instinct.
Okay, but surely someone's argued, again, that maybe it's just wanting company,
Yeah.
not true empathy.
Oh, for sure. That criticism came up from Silberberg and others. They noted sometimes rats would try to rescue even when the other wasn't obviously distressed or the actions weren't effective. Maybe it's just wanting social interaction.
Right.
But there are strong counterpoints. The trapped rat's distress does seem critical to trigger the helping. Rats seem to tell the difference between distressed and calm cage mates. And the actions themselves figuring out the door seem pretty goal-directed, not just random bumping. Plus, learning the door takes effort. It's not instinct. It argues against simple fear of novelty or something.
So the empathy explanation still seems pretty likely.
It's considered the most likely motivator by many. A lack of helping is sometimes interpreted as reduced empathy. And helper rats don't show the usual freezing fear response themselves in these situations, suggesting their focus is on the trapped one, not their own risk. It really points towards biological roots for helping.
Okay, so we've got strong behavioral evidence, hints at the neurobiology.
Yeah.
What about genes? Are there specific genes linked to rodent empathy?
That's still a pretty new area for rodents, actually. Much less explored than the behavior or brain stuff.
Really?
Yeah, most gene work on empathy-related things has been in humans, looking at genes involved in bonding, social behavior, stress response, things like OXTR for oxytocin receptors, AVPR1A for vasopressin.
Okay.
In mice, though, we do see strain differences, like BAL, BCJ mice tend to be worse at social fear learning than, say, C57BL6J mice. That's just a genetic component.
Different personalities almost.
Kind of, yeah. And some really recent work even linked certain immune genes to how sociable mice are. So the genetics is starting, but it's early days. It's important, though, because understanding the genetics in animals might eventually shed light on human conditions with social deficits like autism or antisocial personality disorder.
Right, a potential avenue for understanding those. So let's try and pull this all together. What are the main takeaways from this whole deep dive into rat and mouse empathy? What's the big picture significance?
I think one huge takeaway is that it really challenges that old idea of a strict, sharp line between human social life and that of other animals.
Yeah.
Rodents, even with their, smaller prefrontal cortex compared to us primates, they show these key empathy features.
Hmm.
Emotional contagion, pro-social helping. Social neuroscience in lab animals is still growing, but these studies give really solid evidence that basic empathy might be way more common across species than we used to think.
Hmm.
And figuring out how they distinguish self from other is key to understanding altruism, which used to be seen as pretty much a primate-only thing. We don't know all the neural details yet, but these rodent models, they give us an incredible tool to look at the basic mechanisms, cellular, molecular level, in a way we just can't in humans. It helps bridge that gap between seeing the behavior and understanding the biology underneath.
Okay, so quick recap. Rodents definitely show emotional contagion. Their pain and fear are modulated by social factors. They engage in helping behavior, suggesting real, if basic, forms of empathy. Oxytocin is a major player. Genetics is starting to be explored.
Exactly. And these rodent studies are super valuable models. They help us dissect the fundamental building blocks of empathy and social behavior. And that, in turn, could really inform how we understand our own complex social world and conditions where social functioning is different, like autism.
It's been absolutely fascinating. It really makes you pause and consider, doesn't it? Given all this, what deep evolutionary pressures might have pushed even these basic forms of empathy to develop across so many different kinds of animals? And what can these seemingly simple social acts in rats or mice tell us about our own fundamental need for connection, for concern for others? Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.